Hello, Kyle here. I am going to review Thor Love and Thunder. I had a whole weekend to process my thoughts about this movie, and I think that as it stands now, I am very mixed on Thor Love and Thunder. I don't think it is a terrible film by any means, nor do I think it is a great movie. And I'm more on the side that I just kind of was very disappointed in the film itself, and there are a lot of things in here that I just was not a fan of. And I think a lot of my disappointment comes from how much I really did love Thor Ragnarok. And it's funny that going into this movie, I heard a lot of people saying, well, if you like Thor Ragnarok, then you will probably like Thor Love and Thunder. And I don't really share that sentiment because I've now seen, as the last couple of days have gone by with this film, a lot more audience members that I think liked Thor Ragnarok are not really caring for this film. And the evidence is in the cinema score, and it's also in a lot of the Rotten Tomato scores, and I think a lot of more people are not as thrilled with this movie as they were with Ragnarok. Now, I will start with the positives first, because I think there are many positives in this movie. First off, I think it was a brilliant decision to bring back Natalie Portman as Jane, because Jane is one of my favorite characters from the Thor movies, and also I just love her relationship with Darcy, played by Kat Dennings, and Erik Selvig, played by Stellan Skarsgård. I thought they were I think, bit of a missing element to Thor Ragnarok. However, that film I don't think needed them, but I will say that it feels to me more like a Thor movie when you have those characters in the film. So I was so happy to hear that Jane Foster was coming back. The Jane Foster storyline is a very well written storyline in the comics, written by Jason Aaron, and I personally feel connected to the story because my own mother is a breast cancer survivor, and I think that many other people in any relation to having a loved one that has either struggled with or become a fighter of cancer has really grown attached to Jane Foster in the comics. The thing is that I was very curious to see how they would portray this storyline in the movie, because there was a moment where we weren't even sure as viewers and fans whether that would be adapted. And it wasn't until I would say, I think about a year or so ago, that Natalie Portman came out and said that they would be adapting that storyline. And that made me very happy. It made a lot of people very happy. And I think that they did a very respectable job with adapting that storyline from the comics. I think that it was really cool to see how this is much like an evolution of Thor. This is also an evolution of the Jane character, and we don't exactly know what she's been up to since we last saw her in the Dark World, and then we also heard a little reference of her in Age of Ultron and Thor Ragnarok, and she has written a book by that point. We don't know if she had been dusted, but I think it was very sentimental, but also emotional to see her return in the way they showed her return. Basically, this movie's first appearance of Jane is in a chemo treatment. Well, actually, it's under, I mean, well, yeah, so she's going through chemo, and the movie itself doesn't make fun of it. It does not really, I mean, like, I think they really are respectful towards it, and I love the fact that she's in chemotherapy, and she's sitting next to this other guy that is also a patient, and you could immediately not even notice that he is one, like, because he doesn't look sickly by any means. And I think that was a smart decision. I don't know if it was Taika or the co-writer of this film, but I like that we get to see kind of what it's like to go through chemotherapy, and it's not done in a way that feels forced. It feels very much a part of the storyline, and I do like that we get to see just like a conversation between two people in chemo, which isn't something that a film like this would be something that we would expect from. And I mean, I can only assume a lot of people that just see this movie for the first time without knowing, about the storyline from the comics, they will be kind of shocked to see this. But it really works, I think, in the context. I think that Jane, when she gets the powers of Thor and she becomes the mighty Thor in this movie, she's really fun to watch. Like, there's this thing that happens with her hammer because it is basically put back together from being shattered by Hela in Ragnarok. And I really love how they chose to use the hammer's shattered pieces as like their own separate little hammers. So like when she throws the hammer, the pieces separate and hit other villains and enemies. And I think that was a really cool, both visually and just a new technique that we hadn't seen explored before. I also love that she also gets taller as she gets the hammer, and I recently found out that they put her on like a raised platform because of course Natalie Portman isn't as tall as, say, Chris Hemsworth. I don't even know if she's as tall as Tessa Thompson, so it was really cool to see that they also raised her height. Natalie Portman is just phenomenal in this movie. She really, I mean, I think a lot of people don't give her enough credit in the first couple of Thor films, but I mean, she really is incredible actress and one of my favorite actresses. So I was so glad to see what they did with Jane. I also really do like what they did with Gore and his daughter. They start the film out in this sad scene where Gore loses his child, and I thought that was very moving, very emotional, and very different from what we had seen before in the MCU, where usually the MCU films start off either in a fun way or even a scary way, like if you watch Infinity War. But I do love that the fact that this movie starts off in a very intimate, personal scene between a father and daughter, and there is a score being used, but it is a faint score. It's not over the top. Like, it's not a score that beats you over the head. Michael Giacchino's score is pretty good in this movie, and it's used in a very effective way in the opening scene of the film. Gore as a villain is a pretty good MCU villain. I wouldn't rank him as like the best MCU villain, but I do think that he has, a reason, a motive, and you can understand where he comes from. Christian Bale adds a whole lot of depth to this role that I can't imagine any other actor could have applied to this character. He really does a great job. I also am a fan of a particular sequence in the film that is in the Shadow Realm, where Gore tries to set up Thor and Mighty Thor, Jane, and Valkyrie, and trying to steal Stormbreaker, Thor's axe. And this shot is shot entirely in black and white, and then there are some moments where you see like the red of Thor's cape or Jane's cape, and I think that is a visually beautiful sequence. It is one of the best looking sequences in the entire MCU. It totally, I think, makes the film stand apart from other things that we've seen before. So there's a lot of things in that just sequence I really do like. I will get to the negatives now, because I think I have an easier time with the negatives. With this film, I feel like it's one of those movies that doesn't exactly do it for me, where if I'm watching Black Panther, if I'm watching Infinity War, or the first Ant-Man, those films, like, it really captures me in what they're trying to go for. With Thor Love and Thunder, the issue I had is the storyline of this film is kind of all over the place, to the point where they throw so much at you, whether it's Gore, whether it's Jane, whether it's the this plot with the kidnapping of children, and then they have the Guardians of the Galaxy at one point in this film. It doesn't, I feel, come together cohesively. There are a lot of, I think, problems with the pacing, specifically in the first act of the film, because the first act of the film is very difficult to watch. It's almost nauseating to watch, because they throw you all these jokes, and the way that they kind of use Thor at the beginning of the film before he meets Jane just feels a little bit off to me. If you watch the other films that Thor's been in, I feel like there's been a evolution of the character that you can see from point A to point C. But here, Thor really does not feel like the character he did in the other movies, even in Endgame. And I think that's a little bit of a problem, because I've seen this happen with other films like Iron Man 3, where when they change directors, but when they get like new writers aboard, the characters start to change with the writers. And in the case of this movie, it's not written by the writers of Ragnarok. And of course, it's not written by any of the writers of the previous Thor films. So there are moments where it just doesn't feel to me like the Thor I'm used to. And it isn't until he meets Jane and like around the end of the first act, but it's really like, I think, when they get to where Zeus and the other gods are in this movie, that I really start to feel that it starts to feel a little bit more like a Thor film. It starts to feel a little bit more like the Thor we know. There's a thing with Lady Sif in this movie that I was not a fan of. I thought that they just kind of cast Lady Sif to the side, and I really wish that they spent a little bit more time on the female characters in this movie. Again, I do like what we saw with Jane in this movie, but still, I wish that we got a little bit more of her having fun with the hammer, having it just in awe of, the power she holds, because we never got to actually see that in the first Thor. He's always had that power. In this movie, I was hoping that we would see Jane finally be the characters, wow, look at this superpower I have. That's some of the most fun things to watch in superhero movies, where the character realizes that they're a superhero now. It's one of the things I'm loving about Miss Marvel, the TV series. But yeah, I do wish that we got a little bit more Jane exploring her powers. We don't exactly know what she can do, what she can't do. I also wish that we got more Valkyrie, because Valkyrie is a character that had a wonderful arc, an incredible storyline in Ragnarok, and even in Endgame, I love what they did with her character. But here, she doesn't exactly have an arc. She is burdened with being the new king and having to deal with bureaucracy and everything, but there isn't a storyline where Valkyrie has to gather this specific thing so that she can help and become a better warrior. There isn't exactly a moment in the movie where Valkyrie kind of grows as a character. She's kind of the same character from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. And I wish that we saw a little bit more of her evolving in this movie like we saw in Ragnarok. And even, like, as I said, Lady Sif is a character that I won't really go into details because spoilers and everything, but I do wish that Lady Sif was given more of a role because, once again, it feels like Taika is not focusing on the characters that we got in the first couple of Thor movies, whether it's the Warriors 3, whether it's Lady Sif, and instead we're focusing on the newer characters like Korg and Valkyrie. And even that, I feel like Valkyrie doesn't get enough time. So I do wish that the women in this movie got a little bit more to do than they were given. Thor is Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Hemsworth is great as Thor, but as I said, I think that Thor in this movie, specifically the beginning, just feels off to me. He doesn't quite feel like the Thor from the other films. And then also another criticism I have is in regards to Gore, because I think that Gore is a good villain, but they kind of utilize him in a strange way where he kind of gets cast to the side and it becomes more focused on like Thor and the other characters. But I did want to get more about Gore. I wanted to see him kill more gods. I wanted to get a little bit more of a menacing feeling from him. And I mean, I have to say, like, I wish, like, there's a scene that we see Sif and it's the result of a fight between her and Gore that we don't get to see. And that's another thing, like, I wish we saw that. There's a lot of things that I feel like were either cut out of this movie or they didn't mention and it happened off screen that I would rather see than what we actually got. The jokes work and then they don't. So there's some jokes that do work, there's some jokes that don't. The jokes revolving around like the hammer and the axe, I'm like iffy on, like, some of it does work, some of it doesn't. I think a lot of the stuff with Zeus I really liked, but I mean, some of the stuff with the children in this movie I wasn't too big of a fan of. And then we get to the point with the special effects, the VFX. The VFX in this movie are pretty shoddy. They don't feel like they were given enough time to be finished. Like, I can only assume that this movie could have been delayed a couple of months and they may have had a better time on the VFX, because it just feels to me that they're rushing these VFX artists, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff online recently of VFX artists being pressured and stressed out, and it's a shame because I really think that the movie would improve if the VFX were a little better, especially in the first act of the film, because I think near the end of the movie the VFX improve, especially when they get to the Shadow Realm. But the beginning of the film is filled with so many issues, like whether it's this one kid talking like through like a kind of like a hologram situation, whether it's a specific god that the way he moves his head is not natural, whether it's another scene regarding a baby version of Thor. It just doesn't look right. But and then we get to the music choices, because the music choices are pretty good in this movie, I will say that. And I will say that nearing the end of this review, that the relationship between Thor and Jane is pretty sweet, and it's really nice to see Natalie and Chris working together. But, I mean, there are a lot of issues with this film. If I had to give it a ranking, I would probably give it like a 6 out of 10. So, be that as you will. I think a lot of people will enjoy this movie, and I think a lot of children will enjoy this movie. But, I don't know, like, for you watching. Did you like this movie? What were your thoughts? Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and have a great day. Bye.